Welcome back to my channel. Today, we're going to be talking about one of the most iconic shonen series out there that had to be animated twice, Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood. Now, before we get started, make sure to subscribe to this channel and don't forget to hit that bell icon so you never miss any updates. Now, without further ado, let's get it. Fullmetal Alchemist was created by Hiromu Arakawa. The manga was first published in Square Enix's monthly magazine Shonen Gangman on July 12, 2001, and ran until June 11, 2010. The anime adaptation of Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood was produced by Studio Bones and first aired on April 5, 2009 on the Japanese news network until July 4, 2010, totaling 64 episodes. Now, let's get into the story. One day, in the country of Amestris, two state alchemists in the military, named Edward and Alphonse Elric, are tasked by the Fuhrer, King Bradley, and Colonel Roy Mustang with capturing the rogue state alchemist, Isaac McDougal, known as the Freezing Alchemist. They successfully ambush and capture him, but McDougal escapes. When McDougal threatens Central with a massive alchemaic reaction, Edward, Alphonse, Major Alex Louise Armstrong, and Mustang work together to foil his icy plan. Fuhrer Bradley himself kills McDougal during a final confrontation and praises Mustang and the Elrics for their role in the mission. As they travel to Lior, the brothers recall their childhood, where they learned about alchemy from their father's books and tried to resurrect their mother using human transmutation, causing Alphonse to lose his body and Edward his leg. Edward then sacrificed his arm in order to bond Alphonse's soul to a suit of armor, saving him, eventually joining the military, where Edward gained the name the Fullmetal Alchemist. Meanwhile, back at HQ, Colonel Mays Hughes shows Mustang documents about McDougal's use of a mysterious art called alchemy. Upon arriving in Lior, Edward and Alphonse challenge Father Cornello, who they suspect is misusing a philosopher's stone to manipulate the townspeople. Their confrontation reveals Edward's metal limbs and Cornello's sinister plot. Edward defeats Cornello, who is later killed by a mysterious man and woman with red Ouroboros tattoos. Meanwhile, a man with a scar across his face murders Brigadier General Boss Grand. Mustang and Armstrong are ordered to stop this murderer. They introduce the Elric brothers to Shao Tucker, who allows them to access his research on Chimera. Edward and Alphonse are horrified to discover Tucker has transformed his daughter and their dog into a speaking chimera. Holy crap, this scene was so sad, this was just effed up. Before he's arrested, Tucker is killed by the scarred man, who also grants a merciful death to the chimera. Yo, good! This man deserved all of that. Skipping ahead, Lieutenant Riza Hawkeye updated the brothers on the deaths of Tucker and the chimera. Back in Lior, the tattooed woman and man, along with another tattooed shapeshifter, all stir unrest among the locals, while Edwards and Alphonse face Scar in East City. Scar damages Alphonse's body and then destroys Edward's right arm, but escapes when Mustang and the state alchemists intervene. Mustang explains that this man is an Ishvalan. His people were part of the Ishvalan Civil War, which was a brutal ethnic cleansing campaign waged by the Amestrian military against the Ishvalan people. They then head to Razambul for repairs. While waiting for the train, they meet a man named Tim Marco, who was researching Philosopher's Stones during the Ishvalan War, but disappeared soon after. He then gives them a clue where to find his research data. After arriving in Razambul, Winry and her grandmother fix Edward's automail while Alphonse's armor is restored. When they return to Central to uncover more about the Philosopher's Stone, the research is already destroyed. Sheska, a former clerk with a photographic memory, helps by reproducing the research documents from memory. The brothers decode the information, uncovering the horrifying truth that Philosopher's Stones are created by sacrificing human lives. This leads them to sneak into the 5th laboratory, where they fight the souls of two murderers named Barry the Chopper and Slicer, bound to suits of armor. Edward manages to defeat Slicer, but before he can extract any information from him, Slicer is killed by the woman and shapeshifter. Edward demands to know who they are, but his automail arm breaks and he is knocked out. Alphonse is almost overpowered, but saved by Broche and Ross. The mysterious pair then destroy the lab and carry Edward outside, handing him back to the military, commenting that he is a valuable resource. While recovering in the hospital, Fuhrer King Bradley appears and warns the Elric brothers to be careful around the military, then disappears through their window. Edward and Alphonse confront their personal doubts and past actions. Meanwhile, Hughes discovers a connection between all of the events so far, but is attacked by the woman. He escapes her and tries to contact Mustang with his information at a public telephone booth, only to be pursued and gunned down by the shapeshifter disguised firstly as Ross and then as his wife Gracia. Mustang then concludes that a high-ranking member of the military must be responsible for ordering Hughes' death. The brothers, accompanied by Winry, then head to Dublith to seek more knowledge about the Philosopher's Stone from their teacher Azumi. Edward and Alphonse meet with Azumi and her husband Sig. They reminisce about the tough training she put them through, and Azumi revealing that she had failed at human transmutation too while trying to resurrect her baby. Meanwhile, Mustang prepares his team for a transfer to Central, and Scar recovers in an Ishvalan colony. He defeats two thugs who try to capture him for a bounty. Back in Dublin, Alphonse is trapped by chimeras working for a tattooed man named Greed. Greed reveals that he and the others with red Ouroboros tattoos are homunculus, artificially created humans who are tied to the darkest layers of the military. Alphonse, in shock, is offered knowledge by Greed in exchange for secrets about transmuting souls. Edward then busts in and fights Greed and the chimeras. As the battle escalates, Azumi intervenes, surprising them, but Greed escapes with Alphonse. Underground in the sewers, Greed is confronted by the Fuhrer King Bradley. Bradley begins tearing Greed apart. His eye patch falls off, showing a red Ouroboros tattoo, revealing himself as the homunculus Wrath, defeating Greed. The chimera hiding inside Alphonse tries to kill Bradley, but is killed herself, splattering blood on Alphonse's seal and triggering his lost memories. Greed later awakes, surrounded by the mysterious trio Lust, Gluttony, and Envy, as well as King Bradley. A man named Father, the creator of the homunculus, then kills Greed for being disobedient. The strange thing is, Father appears to be the same man in the photo of Edward and Alphonse's dad. Elsewhere, Scar defeats another state alchemist and meets a young girl named Mei Chang who is searching for the Philosopher's Stone with a tiny panda. Meanwhile, Barry the Chopper reveals details about Hughes' murder under Mustang's interrogation. In Rush Valley, the Elrics and Winry encounter Ling Yao, who is researching immortality. After a confrontation and some destruction, Ling explains he is the 12th crown prince of the eastern nation of Xing and wants the Philosopher's Stone to secure his throne. The group then plans to travel to Central. In Central, Ling is arrested for being an illegal immigrant, and Mustang misinforms the Elric brothers about Hughes' retirement, but they soon learn of his murder. They apologize to Hughes' widow Gracia. Meanwhile, Mustang's plan unfolds as he fakes the death of another officer, Ross, to protect her from a wrongful murder charge and expose the conspiracy within the military. Ross escapes to Xing with Mustang's help. While back in Central, the Elrics are drawn into another conflict. They encounter Barry's crazed human body, and during a violent confrontation, Mustang saves Hawkeye from Gluttony. A recovering Mustang then defeats Lust by snapping his fingers more than the Yin Yang twins and repeatedly burning her alive, permanently depleting her Philosopher's Stone, turning her extra crispy. Edward defeats Barry the Chopper and then heads to Winry's, where he sees his father Hohenheim standing at their mother's grave. Edward asks if the creature they summoned was really their mother, suspecting that it wasn't. After digging up the failed transmutation, Edward confirms this with Azumi, who acknowledges her transmutation wasn't her child either. Reassured, the brothers continue their quest. In the hospital, Mustang suspects that the Fuhrer is working with the homunculus. Havoc reveals his paralysis, but Mustang insists he's still needed. Scar then returns to Central, kills 3 state alchemists, and Edward and Alphonse plan to draw out the homunculus by confronting him. Ling and Lan Fan join to help, hoping to discover immortality secrets. Mustang then sends Brita to find Marco, but learns he's been kidnapped. Edward attracts Scar by showboating in public. While they fight Scar, Mustang misdirects the military to delay Scar's capture until the homunculus appear. Gluttony shows up, but Lan Fan, attacked by Bradley, stops him. Ling tries to escape with the injured Lan Fan, but is attacked by Bradley and Gluttony. Winry then arrives, hearing Edward question Scar about her parents' death. Shocked, Winry aims a gun at Scar, who recounts his tragic story involving his brother and the Crimson Alchemist, Kimberly, leading to him waking up with his brother's arm sewed onto his body and accidentally killing Winry's parents. Edward intervenes, easing Winry's hand from the gun, reminding her that her hands are for healing, not killing. Edward then leaves Winry with the military and rejoins Alphonse against Scar. In the meantime, Ling captures Gluttony with steel cables. Lan Fan then escapes Bradley by attaching her severed arm to a dog, misleading him. Hawkeye then rescues Ling and Gluttony. As the Elrics nearly catch Scar, May helps him escape using alchemy, but they capture her panda. Winry then returns to Rush Valley, realizing she might love Edward. Meanwhile, at a hideout, Lan Fan is treated and Ling exposes Bradley as a homunculus. Gluttony, hearing Mustang's name, partially destroys the hideout. Marco then cooperates with the homunculus to protect his village. Edward, Alphonse, and Ling fight Gluttony, and Envy stops Gluttony from attacking them. During the fight, Gluttony accidentally swallows Edward, Ling, and Envy. In Central, Mustang uncovers a conspiracy involving the Fuhrer and the military's top brass. Inside Gluttony, Edward and Ling discover they're in a cavern-like stomach. Scar, joined by May, searches for her panda, while Edward and Ling confront Envy, learning he started the Ishvalan War. Envy transforms into a giant beast, revealing his true form. Meanwhile, Mustang is isolated by the Fuhrer, placing Hawkeye as a hostage to control him. Edward and Ling battle Envy inside Gluttony, and Edward plans an escape using Envy's Philosopher's Stone and his knowledge of Xerxes' ruins. Bradley reveals his origin to Mustang, explaining his Philosopher's Stone infusion. Back inside Gluttony, Edward uses the stone to open the Gate of Truth, allowing him and Ling to escape, but he leaves behind Alphonse's body, promising to return. Alphonse and Gluttony reach Father's lair, where Edward, Ling, and Envy emerge from Gluttony. Father cancels the brothers' alchemy and transforms Ling into Greed using a Philosopher's Stone. Scar and May fight Father, but escape using a hydrogen explosion. Greed then battles Edward, who senses Ling's presence still residing inside him. Edward and Alphonse leave Father's hideout, led by Envy, and confront Wrath, who threatens Winry to keep Edward in line. Scar meets Marco in prison, revealing their shared tragic past, while Mustang shares Bradley's secret with Armstrong. Marco asks Scar to kill him, but Scar seeks more information first. Afterward, Envy heads to Marco's cell and finds a beheaded corpse. Edward and Alphonse then decide to find May and her panda, after puzzling over why their alchemy still worked when others did not. As Mustang's team scatters across different military bases, he uses a note from Fallman to contact Commander Grumman. Meanwhile, Fu discovers Lan Fan lost her arm and opts against Automail, while Dr. Knox reunites with his family, pleased he treated living patients. Suspecting Marco's escape with Scar, Envy frees Kimberly from prison to find Marco and eliminate Scar. Before heading north, Scar alters Marco's appearance so he won't be recognized. As May travels north with a mysterious companion and Scar heads west with Grumman disguised as a woman, they meet with Mustang to discuss the situation and inform him that May was seen at the station. Mustang passes this information to Edward, who's researching alchemy in the library. Armstrong gives Edward a letter to meet his sister, Major General Olivier Mira Armstrong, at Briggs Fortress. The Elric brothers meet the Fuhrer's adopted son, Salim, and visit his home, where they meet his wife and the Fuhrer himself. Afterwards, they too head north, following May. Meanwhile, Kimberly confronts Scar on a train, leading to a battle where Scar and his companion continue on foot, escaping Kimberly. Kimberly then chases Scar north, catching up to the train only to fight and escape from Scar. Meanwhile, May and Marco find Scar's brother's research and start decoding it. Edward and Alphonse face challenges upon reaching Briggs Fortress. They are captured by Captain Buccaneer and taken to Major General Olivier, who is curious about their search for May and alchemy. Soon, they encounter the homunculus Sloth and manage to capture him with Olivier's quick thinking. Olivier and her soldiers free Sloth and detain the Elric brothers to learn more about the homunculus. General Raven then arrives to oversee the situation, but Edward and the others then discover a tunnel Sloth used, suggesting it's part of a massive transmutation circle across Amestris to create a Philosopher's Stone. Realizing that Amestris was created for this sole purpose, General Raven then tells them to let Sloth go and put him back in the tunnel, but is killed by Olivier because it's revealed that he was a snake working with the homunculus and Kimberly in the first place. Meanwhile, Scar, May, and Marco reunite, and Mustang learns from Olivier about all the BS going down at Briggs. Edward's automail is upgraded by Winry, and Kimberly manipulates him with a Philosopher's Stone, asking him to create a blood crest at Briggs, similar to the Ishvalan Civil War. Edward, pretending to comply with Kimberly, plans to find Scar and learn more about alchemy from May instead. Olivier's forces face an attack from Central Headquarters, while Scar's confrontation with Winry leads to her choosing to heal him rather than seek vengeance, reflecting her parents' legacy. Olivier then meets Bradley at Central, asserting her control by admitting to killing Raven, but persuading Bradley to keep her in power. Meanwhile, Hawkeye secretly informs Mustang that Salim, Bradley's son, is actually a homunculus named Pride. Meanwhile, Father begins having flashbacks of his past, and this is where everything changes. He remembers a nameless slave known as Number 23. Number 23 met a being kept in a flask who was created from his blood. It taught the slave the basics of alchemy, and they became friends. The homunculus in the flask then promised the king of Xerxes immortality and told the king to make a gigantic transmutation circle. As the ritual began, the homunculus in the flask told Number 23 to stand in the middle of the circle holding it. Number 23 then passed out, and when he woke up, everyone in Xerxes was dead, except for him and the homunculus in the flask, who had double-crossed the king, sacrificing the entire country, including the king himself, to create a body that looked exactly like Number 23. And the homunculus named this slave Hohenheim, leaving Hohenheim behind and beginning to call itself Father. Back in the present, Hohenheim encounters Azumi and Sig. Noticing her poor health, he rearranges Azumi's organs so that her blood can flow better, revealing that he had become a living philosopher's stone in human form from the incident in Xerxes. Boom! Father is not Edward and Alphon's dad. This nigga is a clone, and Hohenheim has been magic all this time. Man's been MIA because he's trying to find a way to defeat Father. Back in the present, Miles plans to assassinate Kimberly and his henchmen, despite Edward's objections. As Scar and his group exit the mine, they meet Alphonse, who informs them of Central Command's control over Briggs Fortress. Scar then leads them to an Ishvalan slum. Miles attempts to snipe Kimberly, but Kimberly, sensing danger, uses the snow to hide and enters the mines. Edward follows and fights Kimberly's chimeras, Darius and Heinkel, disabling them with dynamite ammonia. Edward then disarms Kimberly of his Philosopher's Stone, but Kimberly uses another hidden stone to cause a massive explosion, injuring Edward severely. Edward instructs the chimeras to help him stop his bleeding by sacrificing part of his lifespan. Alphonse then awakens to find he was disassembled for transport back through the tunnels. While reassembling him, May rearranges pages from Scar's brother's notes, uncovering a transmutation circle that could neutralize a Mestris nationwide circle. Kimberly meets Pride, who instructs him to carve a blood crest at Briggs. Meanwhile, Hohenheim discovers Sloth's tunnels under a church in Lior and encounters Pride, managing to escape. Kimberly then collaborates with Drachma to attack Briggs' fortress. Briggs easily defeats their forces, using their bodies to unwittingly form a blood crest. Marco and May set a trap for Envy, who falls for it and is reduced to his weakest form by Marco. Scar then decides to send Envy with May back to her country. Alphonse and his group head towards Lior, while Olivier learns of her fortress victory and a secret humanoid creation project. In Lior, Alphonse's group encounters Rose and a man resembling Hohenheim. Rose and the locals welcome Alphonse and Winry, and Edward's bank withdrawal is tracked by the military, who then raid the clinic he is in. But Edward, Darius, and Heinkel escape. Hohenheim shares the truth of his past and the impending promised day with Alphonse. Meanwhile, Olivier is shown an army of created humanoids. Beto, seeking Greed, is killed by him, triggering a battle of conscience within Greed. That night, Greed attacks Bradley's mansion. Greed survives the fight with Bradley and flees. May is then misled by Envy to return to Central. Edward, Darius, and Heinkel reach a hideout in Central, meeting Ling, who briefly regains control of his body from Greed, to warn them about Father's plans. After this, Winry is escorted back by Briggs soldiers as Edward warns her of the danger. Scar then recruits Ishvalans for his cause, and Alphonse, experiencing more blackouts, is captured by Gluttony and Pride. Mustang then discloses Salim's true identity to Olivier as Pride. On the eve of the promised day, Bradley is presumed dead following a train explosion, setting the stage for a military upheaval led by Olivier. As the battle ensues in Central, Mustang's team is initially cornered but rescued by his old Ishval comrades and additional reinforcements. Mustang's tactics disrupt Central's military, with Olivier killing a general to seize control. Edward's group re-enters Central to confront their enemies directly, splitting up to tackle different objectives in a strategic push against the homunculus and their creator, Father. When mannequin soldiers attack the military and a senior staff member, Edward releases them and they join the fight. Meanwhile, Olivier faces Sloth, who's been ordered to kill her. Simultaneously, Alphonse and Heinkel realize Pride has been sending Morse code messages and are soon attacked by Kimberly, who frees Pride. In the sewers, May battles mannequin soldiers, and Envy is released and regains his human form. Olivier and Armstrong struggle against Sloth, and Alphonse, using a Philosopher's Stone, fights Pride and Kimberly. Alphonse uses the Philosopher's Stone to enhance his abilities, but faces challenges when Kimberly uses his own stone. As the Armstrongs fight Sloth, revealing his speed, Alphonse is captured again. Heinkel, now healed by Marco, manages to defeat Kimberly. Yoki then rescues them, and Pride consumes Kimberly, absorbing his powers. The Armstrongs manage to impale Sloth temporarily, but face more mannequin soldiers. May continues fighting Envy and the soldiers, and Edward's group, nearly overwhelmed, is saved by Mustang and Hawkeye. Mustang's team uses Bradley's wife in a broadcast to incite support for their coup, while Briggs soldiers attack Central Command. Mustang incinerates the mannequin soldiers and confronts Envy, who admits to killing Hughes and raging Mustang. Mustang's relentless attack on Envy worries Edward about Mustang's vengeful path. However, Envy, unable to withstand Mustang's flames, unalives himself. Meanwhile, the Armstrongs slowly overpower Sloth with Izumi's help, and then tackle the mannequin soldiers. Underground, Father tries to extract Hohenheim's Philosopher's Stone unsuccessfully. Bradley, alive despite rumors of his death, advances on Central, vowing to retake it. Bradley begins cutting up everybody. This man's a menace. Look at this guy. This guy's a demon. Eventually, Mustang performs human transmutation in order to save Hawkeye, which results in him going blind. Meanwhile, Scar, battling Bradley, watches as May disrupts Father's lair from above. As the battle intensifies, Edward and Alphonse confront Pride, and May challenges Father directly. Scar uses alchemy to boost his abilities against Bradley. Father, nearing his goal during the eclipse, attempts to absorb the ultimate power of the Eye of God, escalating the conflict to its peak with all souls and Amestris at stake. In Father's lair, everyone survives a massive human transmutation, where Father uses over 50 million souls to contain the Eye of God in a new body and neutralizes alchemy. However, Hohenheim had earlier placed fragments of his Philosopher's Stone across the country, which react during the eclipse to strip Father of the captured souls and the Eye of God. As Father weakens and attacks Edward's group, May and Hohenheim combine efforts to keep him at bay. Above ground, Scar defeats a temporarily blinded Bradley by activating a nationwide alchemy circle, boosting his alchemy's power. Father, desperate for more souls to sustain his weakening body, is pursued by Edward's group. Edward confronts Pride, who tries to take over Edward's body, but is stopped when Kimberly's soul intervenes, allowing Edward to destroy Pride's form, leaving only a harmless remnant behind. Meanwhile, Father creates human-like figures from the people of Xerxes' souls and attacks, nearly destroying the headquarters. Their survivors barely withstand the attack, with Alphonse and Hohenheim sustaining severe injuries to shield the others. Edward, Armstrong, and Izumi retaliate as Father weakens even more, forcing him to defend himself physically. During the clash, Father pins Edward's left arm and destroys his right automail arm. In a critical moment, Alphonse sacrifices his soul to restore Edward's right arm, enabling Edward to overpower Father with a barrage of attacks, ultimately defeating him. Father is then condemned to the Gate of Truth, where all alchemy comes from, for eternity. Following the battle, the group mourns Alphonse's sacrifice. Edward refuses to use a Philosopher's Stone to resurrect him, choosing instead to sacrifice his own ability to perform alchemy to bring his brother back to life. As Alphonse returns and the brothers recover, Hohenheim dies contently in Rizambul. In the aftermath, Mustang prioritizes restoring Havoc's legs over his own eyesight using a Philosopher's Stone offered by Marco and Nox. Meanwhile, Olivier has Scar's wounds treated to help rebuild Ishval with Mile. As Ling promises to care for May's clan upon becoming emperor, the Elric brothers return to Rizambul, receiving a warm welcome from Winry. Grumman, now the Fuhrer, keeps an eye on a young, seemingly innocent Celine. Alphonse now plans to study alchemy in the east, while Edward heads to the west to gather different knowledge. But not before expressing his true feelings for Winry, and Winry expressing hers in return. The last scene, skipping ahead, showing a family photograph in the future of Edward and Winry now married with 2 children. And that's the end of Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to transmute that like button, click subscribe, and punch the bell notification icon so you never miss an update. Until next time, peace.